So, is a 2.87 goals against average and an 893 save percentage in the AHL good enough for an NHL goaltender? Well, the Seattle Kraken seem to think so. Philipp Grubauer is back. So, what now? Let's talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Yep, that's right. Philipp Grubauer is back. The UMA hat is back. And so is the Locked On Kraken podcast. My name, Erica L. Ayala, your host, and we have a lot to talk about. We're going to start with Philipp Grubauer. We're going to break down the Vancouver game a little bit, and of course, talk about the trade deadline. It's more of the usual suspects, although Sound of Hockey added another player to the watch list, potentially more of like a stretch, but I want to talk about that all on today's episode. So, shortly after we got the final result for the Vancouver game, I suppose the next day, the Seattle Kraken announced that they had recalled Philipp Grubauer. Philipp Grubauer played 7 games in the AHL in his version, as we've been talking about, of like a reset. And it was an opportunity for him to just get some more games under his belt. That's something that was said prior to or when he was moved. It was something reiterated by Dan Bylsma as well as Philipp Grubauer, who we'll hear from shortly. And this is my question, though. So I'm going to read you the stats going into some of the clips that we have for you. I'm going to read the stats coming out of this, because is this enough of a reset for us to get what we need from Philipp Grubauer? I, for one, still have questions. I mentioned he played 7 games, 5 in 2 in those games, put on 418 minutes of work. I mentioned the 287 goals against average and 893 save percentage. Now, if we look at those comparative to the AHL, as of right now, with goaltenders who are listed, because right now Philipp Grubauer, for example, isn't listed because he's back with the NHL team. He would rank top 30 on the lower end of the top 30 for his goals against average, which is 287 in the AHL. His 893 save percentage would rank 38th in the AHL as of today, Monday. Those are the stats. So let's hear from Philipp. We'll hear from Dan Bylsma, and then we'll break this down on the other side. Philipp Grubauer speaking to media for the first time since returning to the big club.
Phil, how would you describe the past 3 to 4 weeks for you, and what would you like to say about being back with the Kraken now?
Pretty turbulent there for a hot minute, but it's great to be back. Great to go down there and play a couple games and get into a rhythm a little bit and see some pucks and see a couple game situations.
What was the whole situation presented to you from the coaches here about going down to Coachella in the first place?
Yeah, go down there and play a couple games.
That was all it was. They just said go play a couple games.
Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Yeah.
How do you feel about your game right now?
Yeah, good. I mean, it's played 7 games down there in a pretty short amount of time, so it was really good to get into one. And I think they threw every possible scenario at me, 2-on-1s, power play. So it's good. And whenever they need me up here, like I'm ready to go, and then that's it.
Was there anything you felt like you got better at while you were down there?
But just like seeing the puck and reading the game. It's tough if you sit on the bench for 25 days and then you have to play. So for a goalie, it's always like important to get into a rhythm. So I think getting into a rhythm.
So there you go. Philipp Grubauer saying that it was important for him to get into a rhythm. And this is something that we've talked about on the show. I told you that when I was in New Jersey, I had a conversation with some members of the media corps talking about just that. Philipp Grubauer better in rhythm. Zame, when he was on the show, and he will be coming back very soon, so we have that update for you. But when Zame and I did a show a while back, we were breaking down the numbers, and it was Zame that mentioned Philipp Grubauer better when he has some continuity. That being said, his numbers overall haven't warranted that continuity. And right now, the role that he needs to be able to fill is to back up Joey Daccord. So you heard from Philipp Grubauer. What does this mean for the Seattle Kraken moving forward? No more Coco, no more Steska. And so, as far as we know, we're rocking with Joey Daccord and Philipp Grubauer. Joey Daccord didn't have a great game. We saw that Coco got, his first taste of the NHL the other night. Joey did make a comeback. We'll talk about his game and the game against Vancouver coming up. But let's hear what Dan Bylsma had to say regarding Philipp Grubauer and his return to the Seattle Kraken.
It's a introspective time, I'll say. It's not obviously news that he wanted to have, but I think it forces you into kind of getting back to a rebuild mindset and getting back to your game and getting back to the foundations of what you do and how you do it. And by all messages, he did that. Pretty much every report from Colin Zuanello and Lax down there is he was an NHL goalie. The American League, and then it can produce more scrambly situations. It can be a little more hectic, I'll say, and that's a challenge. To playing in that league is it's not quite as structured and not quite as, so you get presented with some scrambly situations. You look at the quantity and the quality, and you look over the 7 games. And again, the reports that Daly was, there's a difference. He's an NHL goalie.
There you go. He's an NHL goalie. That being said, even in that clip, Dan Bylsma didn't really offer much as a counter to some of these numbers. If we look again at his numbers, I mentioned it. 7 games started, 5-2 in those 7 games, 418 minutes. A 2.87 goals against average puts him in the top 30 of the AHL right now. An 8.93 save percentage that would rank 38th in the NHL and in the AHL. I mean, those numbers are not as good as the numbers that he actually had with the Seattle Kraken. Kate Shefty wrote the other day when the news came down, and we talked about this on the show, his 383 goals against average and his 8.66 save percentage, dead last among goalies who have appeared in at least 20 games. So again, a 383 goals against average. So he's at a 287. So that's an improvement. And then the save percentage in the NHL prior to going to Coachella Valley, an 8.66. He's coming back with an 8.93. So yes, there are improvements. You would expect, right, that his numbers would improve given that this is a Vezina finalist that's going to the AHL. I'm not sure they've improved enough. So, he talked about Philipp Grubauer, that this was a turbulent time in the beginning. We did hear from Dan Bylsma that now that Philipp Grubauer is back, he is an NHL goalie. You just heard that. But that he is expected to get Grubauer some games. But what Grubauer is saying, and he did not mince words, he was short in other areas, but we've heard this from him even prior to getting in games is important for Philipp Grubauer. And on the one hand, you understand that. On the other hand, I completely understand where the coaching staff and the franchise is coming from with maybe not giving him those starts. So how do you balance this? So are we going to see Philipp Grubauer for the next handful of games? We've got, I'll show this on the screen for those watching on YouTube. But of course, tomorrow is a game day. We'll talk about this. We're in the March box here. So coming up at home is a game against the Minnesota Wild. We'll also play them later in the month. But then on the road, it's Nashville, Philadelphia, and Washington. And that Philly and Washington game, those are a back-to-back. So we know we're going to see Philipp Grubauer for one of those games. If I'm the Seattle Kraken, I'm maybe giving him if not the next 3 games, maybe Joey Daccord gets the game tomorrow at home. Philipp Grubauer gets the first 2 games on the road trip, so that's Nashville and Philadelphia. And then since you're on a back-to-back anyway, Joey Daccord gets the start against Washington. Now, Ovi scoring, he still hasn't scored against Joey Daccord. That still stands even the last time these 2 teams played, because as memory serves, Ovi did get a goal, but it was an empty netter, so that doesn't count against Joey Daccord. Jokes aside, and we'll talk about Ovechkin when we get closer to that game against Washington. But if you want Philipp Grubauer to get a few games back to back, this seems like the best bet. If he doesn't get all 3 games before Washington, at least 2 of them, I think that's fine. And here's the thing, what is the end goal right now for the Seattle Kraken? The playoffs, not technically mathematically impossible, but highly improbable at this time. We're going to talk about what the Vancouver game signals, but not only are you thinking about what this team needs to do to get more consistent, to show and build the foundation of what this team is going to be like in the future, but this is the final week before the trade deadline. So what is important from an organizational aspect? Do they need to win games? Do they need to win games in a certain way? Do they need certain guys to be able to have a breadth of work going into the trade deadline so that they can utilize them as part of some of the trades that they're thinking about? I don't know that we have an answer just yet. This is a Seattle team that I'm confident that they know what the reality of their situation is, excuse me. And with regard to the playoffs, it's pretty bleak. With regard to the potential to still show your fan base, your fellow teammates, your coaching staff, and of course the front office to show what this team really is made of, they need to play to win games. If they actually win the games or not, almost doesn't matter at this point because, again, playoff odds are pretty much shot, right? There's more on the line, though. And I think, honestly, because we have a new coaching staff, how the Kraken play out the rest of this season is going to be critical. It's going to be critical on how the team moves forward. So we still have a lot to talk about, but I want to talk about the bounce back. That's right, the bounce back, bounce, bounce, bounce. The Seattle Kraken got that bounce back. They bounced right back into the win column. Can they stay there? That is the big question for this team. We'll hear a little bit from Dan Bylsma. I'll break down my analysis, even though they basically, too long didn't listen. They basically did everything I said they should do on the Friday preview episode, and I love to see it. But we'll break down a few specific things coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And you can also get the Wonderful Pistachios no shell for grab and go ease. The satisfying crack, though, of each shell is its own form of snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings, dropping off your children, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So get snacking and get cracking, Kraken fans, with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thanks as always, Seattle hockey fans, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica Ayala here. So glad that the pregame hat worked this time. Gonna have to work that in a little bit more. We, of course, have the post-game win, the victory hat, the UMA hat here with my pirate booty hanging out on the side. That's funny. Anyway, the Seattle Kraken team got back in the win column. They beat a divisional opponent, which I love to see, and they did it by attacking the net. And that was a huge point of emphasis in the post-game scrum, as well as the podium appearance from Dan Bylsma. Now, we did hear from Brandon Montour as well as Shane Wright post-game. The audio was a little bit wonky, so I didn't want to play that for y'all. But another great game. Here are some notes, some of these per Allison Lucan and her post-game instant analysis. Now, this I found interesting from Allison. The Seattle Kraken won by 3 goals, mind you, despite falling short in shot volume and shot quality. Now, the shot volume or the shot quality, 3.7 for the Vancouver Canucks, 2.2 for the Seattle Kraken. Shot volume, 31 shots on goal for the Canucks, 24 on goal for the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken did score first. Andrei Burakovsky got the party started, which you'll love to see. Other numbers, neither team was successful on the power play. Both had 2 opportunities. But I told you last week this was going to come down to 5-on-5, especially if this game was going to go in the favor of the Seattle Kraken, which it absolutely did. Just a few other stats before I take you over to Dan Bylsma and what he had to say about the game. Now, this was the 11th game for the Kraken where they scored 5 or more goals, and the 8th game where 11 or more skaters had at least 1 point. Shane Wright, Andrei Burakovsky, Jaden Schwartz, Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, all getting onto the stat sheet. Though Eli Tolvanen was the only player with 2 goals, he has tied a career high in goals of 18 in the 22-23 season. He has also reached 50 goals scored with the Seattle Kraken. Now, Shane Wright assisted on the first 2 goals for the Kraken and now has 20 points since January 1st, which is the most by a Kraken player within that span. So all of 2025, Shane Wright is pacing this Seattle Kraken team with goals scored, which I love to see. I also want to note, I talked about Shane Wright's ice time. Time on ice did go up roughly 2 minutes. From our last conversation, he was averaging about 13:30 or somewhere in there, time on ice, 15:28. And I love to see this. I want to see more of this. I think Shane Wright has earned some more ice time. Now, this was the 25th quality start for Joey Daccord, who also had a shot on net. And between Dan Bylsma and Brandon Montour, they teased him a little bit. I think Bylsma called it a muffin shot. But Joey Daccord, 28 of 31 saves again for his 25th quality start. And it was a bounce back. That's what Dan Bylsma said. He said it a few different times, a few different ways. Here are some snippets from what he told media after the big win at Climate Pledge Arena.
From that game and in this game as well, just the evidence of how we got the goals were, a good bounce back message for the guys as well. Just getting to the net front, going to the inside, fighting and battling to get there, and we got the result as a result. Well, our D provided a lot of offense for us this year, not only in scoring goals, but they're a real driver in the offensive zone. They're a real driver moving the puck up the ice, and Dunner tonight, Monty tonight, Lars tonight, getting the puck to the net for those opportunities to happen were critical and key. Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned it with taking the head off thing, but the courage to go to that area as well. I think in an effort to try to score more goals, like that's where you got to go. You got to go to the inside, and That takes an intent and takes courage to go there and get there. I think hockey's the highest skilled, it's the fastest game and the highest skilled, and that's just an example of it. It's guy trying to take your head off an 80-mile-an-hour shot coming at you and the goalie, and to be able to tip it, and the instance of getting the puck to the net, and when you have the courage to go to the inside and get there, and tonight it's how we produce most of our goals.
I want to stop there for a moment because Dan Bylsma talking in that clip about this is getting to the net. Getting to the net, which was one of my keys to the game, right? In that Friday preview episode, I said the Seattle Kraken have to get to the net. And, the question was asked and Dan Bylsma responding that it does take some courage. It takes a lot to do that. But it is what is required for this team to score. And we need to play some hard-nosed lunch pail hockey to be able to score. That's how this team is built. That's how they are most successful. And I want to see more of it. I told you, I'd be happy to lose every single game for the rest of the season if we have a roster from soup to nuts, top to bottom, A to Z, 1 to 3, whatever. We are fighting for, as Jared McCann said last week, the name on the front of the jersey. I liked this win. I liked that it came with some grinding in front of the net play. And if we look at the game score, top players, according to game score, Ellie Tolvanen, Jared McCann, Josh Mahura, who I want to talk about a little bit, Riker Evans, good to see him back in action, and Andre Burakovsky. Needed a big game from Andre. We got a game from Andre. We got a game from Tolvi. Some of these names, Tolvanen, Burakovsky in particular, are names we continue to hear when it comes to trade rumors. Of course, top of that list is right now Brandon Tanev, because as I outlined last week, Yanni Gourde perhaps in a little bit of a holding pattern because of the injury. Today is March 3rd. So tomorrow, March 4th, it's a game day. We'll see if we have any updates regarding Yanni Gourde. We had heard reports, read reports, talked about reports on this podcast that it was looking like Yanni would be coming back on March 4th. We did not hear anything to affirm or confirm that from Dan Bylsma today, Monday. So we'll see if we get any nuggets from morning skate or after morning skate. I would imagine, though, that the Seattle Kraken might keep this close to the vest, but we'll see what happens. Just really like how this Kraken team was able to get that win, including we heard Dan Bylsma say that this team, they they don't want to have to battle back. They don't want to have that tenacity late. They gave up a shorthanded goal in this game as well. They don't want to have to play that kind of a game, but it's a good indicator. It's a good indicator of the focus, the drive, the passion, and the fire, the moxie, the sandpaper that this team has, that they could do it once again. Now it's a matter of getting to a point where they don't have to do that. And that's what Dan Bylsma was asked a little bit later in his press conference after the game. And here's what he had to say with regard to how do you get the team to stay motivated and not have to get motivated all the time.
The inside and having that tip, and Borky and Tolvi, and we had a couple on the power play that they didn't go in the net, but Schwartzy as well at the net doing that. We want to be a relentless team. We want to be a team that keeps coming at you regardless of the situation, regardless of the score, regardless of where we're playing at. And, I don't want to be someone who gets behind, but the guys have shown, your words, great resilience and great fortitude, just staying on the game, staying with it, keep going, regardless of the situation. And it's enabled us to come back in a bunch of games.
Dan, throughout the season, you've talked about playing the game with emotion, and I think that showed up tonight. And there's tenacity coming back, contributions. Why does it show up like that tonight, but not every night? You know what I mean? Like, why is it so hard to predict when they're gonna show that?
I just think that's the challenge for this team. It's a challenge for our team is being consistent with that every night. And I'm gonna pat him on the back for the competing effort tonight.
And, I think that's the right move. This team, in theory, right, knows what they need to do. And so praising what worked well instead of harping on what didn't, I'm okay with that for now, Dan Bylsma. I'm okay with it for now. We'll see what happens for tomorrow, where I will have another hat, a pregame hat. I got to have a little bit of a routine myself just to make it fun, right? Wear my pregame hat tomorrow. Hopefully that will lead to me being able to wear my postgame hat for an episode on Wednesday. And this is an interesting stretch for the Kraken. It's not a playoff spot on the line, but it's pride. It's being able to build rebuilds. I honestly think. I know the Seattle Kraken are saying it's not a rebuild. I do think the culture of this team is being completely tested and, yes, rebuilt in some ways. That's important. And who's going to be around to help the rebuild? Well, we don't know yet, but we'll know soon. At least we'll know if anyone gets moved at the trade deadline. So let's once again talk about some players who we continue to hear as part of the trade rumor mill in Seattle. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host, wearing the UMA hats, the hat that I wear when the Seattle Kraken get back into the win column like they did against Vancouver. Before I talk about some trade rumors, let's go to the standings. Again, not very favorable for the Seattle Kraken. If you're a Kraken fan, I'm sure you're not surprised by that. But let's talk about the division. The Seattle Kraken right now sits 7th overall in the division, only ahead of the San Jose Sharks. Definitely not where I thought the team would be, but here we are. We have 56 points in the standings. We're behind Anaheim with 59. Vancouver, we just got a win against them. They're at 65, as is the Calgary Flames, who are in that 4 spot. Then at 70 points even, the Kings, the Edmonton Oilers at 74, and Vegas at the top of the table with 78 points. When it comes to the wild card, again, we can't be too surprised about what's going on there. Above the line for the wild card in the West, the Colorado Avalanche and the Calgary Flames that I just mentioned. So 72 points for the Avalanche, 65 points for the Flames. Vancouver also sitting at 65 points there. And, we were able to stop them from advancing in our last game against them. Behind Vancouver is St. Louis, Utah, Anaheim, and then the Seattle Kraken sitting in 7th overall, just ahead of Nashville, who we will take on later this week. We're also going to be taking on the Minnesota Wild, but they're in a top spot here in the Central division in the West. So we'll see what the rest of their season looks like. 74 points for them. So not favorable for the Seattle Kraken. We've been kind of trying to guess what that means. Will the Seattle Kraken actually be active? Is there anything for them to be active regarding? Names keep swirling, rumors keep swirling about one name in particular. That's Brandon Tanev. He, just like Yanni Gourde, who I talked about the other day, has certain limitations to any trades and no movement clauses. Similarly to what we're hearing from Yanni Gourde, Brandon Tanev, if he must be traded, wants to go to a contender. So what that looks like, what's out there what's available, but his stock rises because of the work that he puts in. And that's always what we've loved about Brandon Tanev. He's been fantastic on the penalty kill for the Seattle Kraken. Maybe you want some more from him offensively, but if he's doing the right things, he has the right energy, the right attitude. That's something that certainly we need more of on the Seattle Kraken team. So it'd be hard to let him go. And we also need to make some moves. So I'm curious to see if Brandon Tanev will be the first player or the only player, I don't know, that we see moved. Another name, and this was mentioned by the Sound of Hockey, is potentially, potentially moving Josh Mahura, who I mentioned. And so Darren Brown writes for the Sound of Hockey that, and the Sound of Hockey has a few different categories with regard to trades. So Josh Mahura is at the top of the could stay, but a trade wouldn't be shocking category over at the Sound of Hockey. I would guess he doesn't move simply because I don't expect there to be a huge market for him, Darren writes. But once Riker Evans returns from injury, he has returned. It is possible that the Kraken move on from Mahura and keep Cale Fleury, who has performed well, up with the big league, or the big club, excuse me. On a one-year deal, Mahura hasn't played himself into a full-time spot on the blue line, but he has taken over that vacated spot after Will Borgen was dealt to the New York Rangers. He's on a league minimum deal and has been a good soldier, but the Kraken would surely listen if anyone comes calling on him. So Josh Mahura, now does that get us closer? I mean, all of this really to me depends on what the Seattle Kraken are going to want in return, or probably more likely what they're able to even get in return. And that's where things, are a little bit up in the air. Now, deadline deals, as Darren writes, typically bring back draft capital. And the Seattle Kraken have loaded up on draft picks before. So are the Kraken, this is the question that Darren asks. So are the Kraken really looking to trade reliable players for draft picks that may or may not help them 5 years down the road? One has to think there will be a desire to bring useful younger players that have either already cracked the NHL lineup or are right on the cusp of being future full-time NHLers rather than more poker chips. I agree with you. We have to move on from the poker chips, because if this is a team that isn't in a rebuild, if this is a team that wants to win in the future, but also wants to win now, you need players that can help with the offense. Didn't play it in the clips that I shared on today's episode, but Dan Bylsma continues to be impressed with how the defense is stepping up to facilitate transition offense for this team. Now, that has to be something, though, that one, your forwards can do. But number two, if the defense is helping the offensive efforts, then the forwards, the strikers, the attacker strikers is more soccer. But the skaters, the forwards have to be able to do the same for the defensemen in areas where the Seattle Kraken are playing defense. Blown and botched defensive assignments continue to drive me crazy just generally, but it's like it's a huge problem with the Seattle Kraken team. So we do need to, I don't want us, if we're trading at the deadline, to only be collecting picks. I don't want us also, though, to be getting players that we can't really utilize. And so is it maybe a hybrid? Do we get guys that can maybe move the needle in the short term, as in the rest of this regular season, and then because of conversations that are being had that we're not privy to some of those guys that if they do come at the trade deadline, do they then become players that we can create another package, have them be a part of a package for something that gets us a little bit closer to what we need? These are all the questions, and hopefully we'll have answers soon, because the trade deadline officially on Friday, and I am excited, a little bit nervous, a lot of bit nervous to see what the Kraken do. It's a busy week in hockey, so be kind to yourself, be kind to one another, and hold fast. Stay true and loud and proud we say, especially for tomorrow's game day, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.